What is your name?
Frank Dean.
When and where were you born?
Born in Raleigh, October 23rd, 1943.
Can you tell me a little bit about your family?
My wife and I, Glenda, have been married for 48 years, and at the end of August of this year, we have 3 sons and we have 6 grandchildren, 3 boys and 3 girls. And she's been my adult leadership for that entire 48 years.
What kind of work did your grandfathers do?
In the farming business.
And how about your father?
My father was in the automobile business. He started out back in the early 40s. He did not go to the Second World War, but he would go up north and buy cars and bring them back and resell them. And then somewhere around the 1950 timeline, he bought a Buick dealership in Kings Mountain.
You worked at your father's dealership when you were younger. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that you did there?
I could assemble and disassemble a 4-barrel carburetor in something like 15 minutes. We had some mechanics that would take me under their arm and show me everything that about how to repair cars and how to repair transmissions and how to rebuild engines, and so it was a great learning experience for me.
Besides working at your father's dealership, you also started working in other ways when you were relatively young. Can you tell us a little bit of how that came about?
Well, I decided that I didn't want to work in the dealership one summer, and I was 15 years of age at that time. And so I said, Dad, I want to work in the mill this summer. Well, Kings Mountain was big in the cotton mill business. And we had a friend who owned one of the mills, and so my dad was able to get me a age deferment so that I could work. And that was a tremendous learning experience. I learned that I did not want to work in the cotton mill for the rest of my life. They were wonderful people, but it was just it was a tough life.
Your father died relatively young.
Yes.
But your mother went to work also. Can you tell me a little bit about what your mother did?
Whatever it took to put the food on the table. She would sell encyclopedias, exercise equipment. Because Dad died at a very young age, and she had 4 of us to literally rear. She was an extremely pretty lady, and she had a wonderful communication skills. She was someone who I always thought a great deal of.
What was school like for you?
I was not an academically oriented student. I went to school because it allowed me to do the things that I wanted to do. But I had an English teacher one time, Ms. Logan, taught me 12th grade English. She had a heart-to-heart discussion with me one day, which truly turned my academics around. And she was a key variable in my, whatever I consider my success equation.
Now, after high school, where did you go to college?
Appalachian State. And it was a teacher's college at that time. And yeah, I still wear the ring that says Appalachian State Teachers College. It's an antique now. But I enjoyed my time there, but I still was not focused on education. I played on the golf team up there, and I enjoyed skiing, and I enjoyed, again, getting a college education allowed me to do those things that I really enjoyed doing. And, but once I graduated, my first job was teaching school in Moore County. And I decided at that time that really education was not the area that I wanted to go into. And that was during the time that Vietnam was raging, and I decided to volunteer to go in the Army. And so I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and at Fort Knox I went through my basic training, my advanced individual training, and my officer candidate school, and that was a 9-month window there on those three. And so when I finished as a second lieutenant, I was then reassigned to Fort Polk, Louisiana, which no one ever wanted to go to Fort Polk. I mean, that was just where you didn't want to go. But it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because that's where I met Glenda. My roommate was dating her cousin, and so her cousin said to Buzz Underwood, says, "Buzz, do you know someone that Glenda might be able to go out with?" And he said, "Yeah, it's my roommate." So it was my promotion party when I was becoming a first lieutenant. So we had gone to the promotion party and had dinner, and then on Friday nights at the officers club there at Fort Polk, we always had a band, and so I asked her to dance, and I could dance rather well, and so we got out on the floor and we finished dancing, and she said, "You're him." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "I watched you dance last Friday night," and I thought, "Ooh, I'd love to have a dance with you." And so that's how it all started. We were married 6 months later.
So you'd been sitting down at Fort Polk and you were there. Something happened that kind of halted your military career. Can you talk about that?
Well, I injured 2 vertebrae in my neck. I had drawn orders for Vietnam and injured them while I was on leave, which set me back significantly. It's so much so that they pulled me off orders. And then I wound up spending the remaining time on active duty there at Fort Polk.
You continued your education after the military?
Yeah. I went to Louisiana State University, working on a master's in business administration, and we were there for 2 years. When we completed that time, I really didn't care that much about staying in Louisiana, but I'd always wanted to come back to the mountains of western North Carolina, and so we came back to Asheville, and I went to work for a parachute manufacturer over there by the name of Mills Manufacturing Corporation.
Now, how did you end up back in the military?
Well, first off, let me say, I never had any intention of staying in the military for 29 years. That never crossed my mind. But when we went to Baton Rouge, I thought, well, I can get in the reserve program down here, and it's a nice little piece of change each month coming into us. And by then, our first son was coming along, and we could use every penny that we could get our hands on. So I was an instructor in an Army Reserve School. And then when we finished up, we moved to Asheville, and I got in another reserve unit, of which it was a training division, and I stayed with them during the time that by then I had made major. Then I bought a business, and I thought that I couldn't afford to. I had so much money involved in the business that that really I needed to focus on it. But after it got squared away, and I thought, well, I'll get back in, and so I went back with an Army Reserve School, and then I had a good friend of mine who was Chief of Staff for the 120th Army Command, and he and I were out running one day, and and he said, Frank, the 360th Civil Affairs Brigade has just received its airborne designation, and said, how about, you ever give any thoughts about going to airborne school? And I said, yes. I said, I always wanted to go to airborne school. So one thing then led to another, and I was a senior field grade at this time and a lieutenant colonel. So I went with the 360th. I went through jump school, made my first jump on my 47th birthday. I'll never forget where I was on that day. And but then as time evolved along, I became very involved with parachuting, and by the time I'd concluded my career at the age of 52, I had become a senior parachutist in the American Army, a senior parachutist in the German Army, and awarded jump wings from 5 other nations. I was jumping somewhere in the world about every other weekend.
What did you do during the Gulf War?
My first job, we went to Dhahran, Khobar Towers, and the first thing I was assigned to do was go into the refugee camps and select interpreters. And so we would go into the camps, and you would have these large groups of people, many of them very well educated. And so we needed to have people that were very fluent in the Arabic languages to move forward with us when we moved up north. So once we selected those individuals, then my job was to teach them survival skills. And once we began to get ready to deploy, then they were going, we had 32. They were deployed among the maneuver elements of the 18th Airborne Corps. We were dispersed over a very large area. We made up the left-hand axis of attack. And so these interpreters were assigned out to the various units. Now, for my particular individual self, I was stationed there on Pipeline Road at Rafah, and we would send the teams out to extract the prisoners out of the prisons in Iraq and bring them back into a holding area, and we would screen them to make sure that they were, in fact, Kuwaitis that had been captured, or Iraqis that had been non-sympathizers with Saddam.
Frank, you had wanted to share about your wife, Glinda, and the Gulf War. Would you please tell us about that?
Never really thought about it that much, but the Christian Women's League asked us to speak at one of their luncheons. So I got up and I gave my part and explained kind of the feelings that your family goes through when you realize that you're going to be deployed into harm's way, and your situation with your children and where they are in their life, and but then you leave. But you've got your wife and your 3 children here. And she is the heart, the soul, the body, and the mind for rearing those 3 children. Now I'm out over here in the other part of the world, and I'm not worried about myself because I've got some of the most competent, capable soldiers in the world that I'm involved with. But she got up to speak, and I've never given it any thought. She talked about how difficult the time was for her. and the stress that she was under, and just the compounding of it, and I sat there and I listened, and I thought, I'd never heard anything like this before. The sacrifices that those that have come before me and those that will come after me to keep this country free have paid sacrifices that we have the saying, freedom is not free. And it's truly not. There's people out there in this world that would love to do nothing more than annihilate the entire United States with one blow. And what we have been able to attain in this country is something very valuable and very precious, and it's well worth fighting for and dying for.
During your service, you had an interesting experience meeting with your son. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. The 360th was a worldwide in scope. And so we were tasked to provide a team of 7 to work Operation Bright Star outside of Cairo. And I volunteered to lead the team because my son Carl was stationed over on the Red Sea in the multinational force for the 101st. Well, we get there, it's prior to the startup of the actual exercise. It was a 35,000 soldier operation. Multi-nations, probably 8 or 10 nations that were going to be involved in this exercise. And so it was one of those things where I'm a divine intervention guy. I believe in things like that. Things happen for a purpose. But so I remember it was a Sunday, and I had gone to chapel that morning, had lunch, came back, laying on my cot, reading a book. And a friend of mine came by and said, Frank, how would you like to go up to Alexandria and look at our post that we have set up there? And I said, no. Well, 10 times out of 10, I'm going to say yes, because all I'm doing is laying there on that cot sweating. So about 4 o'clock, I get up and I put my uniform on and I walk out of the tent. And I walk and I turn and I go up another series of tents, and here's a white van sitting there. And the sliding door is open, and there's a gentleman sitting in the seat, rear seat. And he's got on black pants and a white shirt, and I said, are you going to Cairo? And he said, yes. And I said, do you mind if I get a ride? Now, how logical is it that what are you going to do in Cairo at mid-afternoon on a Sunday? I mean, there's no logic in this whatsoever. And so the gentleman said, well, you Colonel Dean? I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, I'm supposed to meet you. And he said, did you bring a coat and tie with you? And I said, yes. He said, well, I'm going to pick you up at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to take you into Cairo to the embassy, and we need for you to talk with our logistics officer there. And I said, okay. So I marry up with the individual, and we go down to the embassy, and while I'm waiting to go in, I have to report to this major. And so I meet the pilot for the embassy aircraft, and we're just having a nice conversation. So it becomes my turn to go in and speak with this major. And the major says to me, well, Colonel Dean, what can you do? And I said, well, Major, I have a better question. What do you need done? And he said, we need contract specialists. He said, the Egyptians are just robbing us on providing us inferior product for what we're paying for. And I told him that we were contract specialists and that we could correct that situation for him. And there was some part of that was true and some part that wasn't, because I didn't know anything about contracts. But so I got my team together and I said, y'all know anything about contracting? And they said, I had this one major, he said, yes sir, that's what I do for a living. I said, good, you're in charge. I said, you just tell me what you want and I'll take care of it. And so he said, okay. It really worked out real well. They moved us from the desert into by our standards, it would be like a Holiday Inn Express, but by their standards, it was a 5-star at the base of the pyramids. So I still wasn't accomplishing my objective of getting to see my son. And I had gone to a Rotary meeting down at the Hilton there on the Nile River in downtown Cairo, where all the protests were occurring a couple of years ago. And so I was at the Rotary meeting, and I called the multinational force, and this was on a Tuesday night, and I get this Australian sergeant major. And so I said, Sergeant Major, in the event of all-out war, how do you get in touch with South Camp to let them know? And he said, sir, I've got an unobstructed line. I said, good. As soon as we finish this conversation, I'd appreciate if you'd pick up the phone, call the battalion commander, tell him I'll be on the ground at 10:30 on Thursday morning in the embassy aircraft. And of which he did. So the next day, Carl is stationed out on this island in the middle of the Red Sea. And they fly a Black Hawk out to get him, and the pilot says, specialist, I don't know who you know, but somebody is coming in on the embassy aircraft, will be on the ground at 10:30 in the morning and wants your presence at the airport. He said, that's my dad. So it was really an absolutely magnificent day. We arrived and I put on my fatigues and made an Army commendation presentation to him, and we had lunch and sat down, talked for a couple hours, and they came back and flew me back to Cairo.
Now, you mentioned you were at a Rotary Club meeting when you were over there. In your work with the Rotary Club, you were able to work on some special international projects. Now, that doesn't deal with that meeting there, but it involves starting out here. Could you tell me a little bit about them and how you got involved with this whole kind of situation with all the things that you did with them?
Well, I've been a Rotarian for 30 years, and in 1998 and 99, I was the club president. And up until that time, our club had never been involved in an international project. And Chuck Abernathy's brother, Eric Abernathy, Eric was a missionary with Hope Worldwide in Bogota, Colombia. And they approached us about working with a medical clinic down there. And so Chuck and Dean Knipe and a couple of other Rotarians and myself flew down there, and we looked at this medical clinic, and it was in the abject slums of Bogota. And in 1999, Bogota, Colombia was not really a very good place to be. And for example, where we were staying, you would never take the same route twice, and there were guards in the garage, and there was a 12-foot brick wall around the condominium complex with concertina wire. And but one of the things that the team from Bogota, they quite frankly never knew how the really poor people lived. And so I know there was one gentleman with the embassy from Belgium that even up until the night before had not decided whether he wanted to go in there or not. And the district governor said, you will go in. And so we took the team in. And it was, I remember going in, the road was very rutted, and there were probably 25 or 30,000 that lived in this area. And this side, had running water, but the definition of running water is just a pipe. And this side over here didn't. And this side over here had latrines with water. This side over here did not. And it was a straight piping situation, and for electricity they would tap into the government system, and it's just a bad deal. And so by the time we had finished, between the Marion Rotary Club and District 7670 and Rotary International, we provided $47,500 to that medical clinic, which allowed the Rotarians there in Bogota to get more involved. They built another 2-story addition, and we were able to take that $47,500 and put it into equipment. And so somewhere around the timeline of 2003, I was an assistant governor, and I was supposed to go to an installation banquet in Waynesville for the incoming governor. I did not want to go. And but my wife just said, well, you took the job, so you just need to suck up and drive on. So I did. So I drove over there, and I'm sitting beside a gentleman that was the district governor of New York. I was club president. And we had an outgoing governor who had been very passionate about wheelchairs. And we had raised more money than any other district in the world to work with the Wheelchair Foundation. A foundation founded by Ken Behring, who's a billionaire. And to date, through the Wheelchair Foundation, over 1 million wheelchairs have been distributed to third world countries. But as we were sitting there that night talking, Bill Armfeld said, well, we've got a problem. Said, Dennis Sanders, the outgoing governor, he's afraid that if we take both of those containers of wheelchairs into Guatemala, that one of them is just going, when you go to third world countries and you put wheelchairs in a warehouse, they'll evaporate. And you understand what I mean. So I went up to Dennis and I said, Dennis, can I have that other container of wheelchairs? And he said, for what? I said, I want to take them to Bogota, Colombia. And Dennis said, well, I'll have to call the gentleman at the Wheelchair Foundation to get clearance. So he called John Grant, who, this man is a miracle worker. And John says, nobody goes to Colombia. And Dennis said, well, I've got a man that'll take him in. So we took in the first container of wheelchairs, and I remember I was at a mid-year assembly, and a past district governor by the name of Tony, Tony's last name just slipped me. It'll come. Anyway, Tony comes up to me and said, Frank, how many do you have on your team? And I said, I'm going by myself. And I said, I'll take you. And Tony had been one of the original members of Special Forces. And so Tony and I went to Bogota, and we took the wheelchairs in, and we were in this hospital. And we were in the auditorium, and they had a number of wheelchair recipients positioned around the center aisle. And so it came my time to speak, and I stood up and I was telling the story about how the wheelchairs had wound up there. And by the way, Tony's last name is Baker. But as I was speaking, there were 3 soldiers that brought this man in a wheelchair. And they picked him up from the hospital chair and put him in one of our chairs. And so he had his leg blown off at the right knee and a pin in the right arm. And so when I concluded, I said, is that man a soldier up there? And they said, yes, sir, he is. And I said, well, from one soldier to another soldier, I want you to accept that wheelchair as my personal gift to you. You could have heard a pin drop in that place. And so when we concluded, he said, sir, the soldier would like to thank you. So I go up, and the only thing you can see of me is my hand where I'm shaking his. But the look of endearment on the man's face is just priceless. And so that's when I found my purpose. I knew that my purpose then was to be involved in wheelchairs. And so that started one of many international trips that I've made on behalf of Rotary International and the Wheelchair Foundation. I've been to Nicaragua on 2 wheelchair distributions, the Philippines, back to Colombia for a couple of more distributions. Then I orchestrated 5 containers, and each container has 280 wheelchairs in it, and they cost $43,500 each. And Ken Baring, the philanthropist, would put up 75. If you put up 75, that builds a wheelchair that can be distributed somewhere in the third world. And then orchestrated another 5-container operation into the Caribbean. Then I brought a really dear friend of mine on, who was district governor the same year I was, for the western portion of Virginia. And Woody has been involved probably in a little over 5,000. So I kind of take credit for his 5 too, you know. But it's hard to believe how some people live in this world. I know that a very striking and poignant story was we had just finished my second distribution in Managua, Nicaragua, and we were really feeling good about ourselves. We'd put the metal on the target. People were lined up. I mean, and it's sweltering hot out there, but we distributed those wheelchairs to those people. So that night at dinner, we're having dinner with their Rotary Club, our team is, and this young lady comes up to me and she said, "May I speak privately with you?" And I said, "Yes." And so we went over to the side, and she said, "I know that you're supposed to start your sightseeing tomorrow, but I have a request. I'm going to ask you to go inside the Managua City trash dump." And this is about a 3 to 5 square mile trash dump that they estimate 11,000 people live in, with no water and sewer. And it's just mountains and mountains of trash. And these estimated 11,000 people, they're digging through this trash to see if there's anything they can find in order to be able to resell, and that's how they live. And whatever shanties they're able to pull together is out of materials that they can get out of the dump. And so I remember we were riding through, and here's a man, a woman, and 2 little girls sifting through the trash. And I said, "Stop the truck, I want to take a picture." Well, got out of the truck, and I'm getting ready to take the picture, and I look right in line with these 4 people, and here's a stump with 6 vultures sitting on it, and I couldn't take the picture. There's a story. The same school where we had done that distribution, they did a documentary on the children from the dump. And they were interviewing this little girl who was about 7, and you know, she was filthy, and matted hair and just holes in her shoes. But the interviewer was saying, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She said, "I want to be like you." And he said, "Oh, you want to be a reporter?" And she said, "No. I want to live in a house with running water and a bathroom." That makes an impression on me. But I've been to places where people shouldn't have to live.
Tell me how you got involved in trails work.
November of 2005, on a Saturday morning. Earlier in the week, Bill Henley called me, and Bill and I both retired military, and we ran, I think it was 88 and 89, the New York Marathon together, and so good friends. But we'd kind of gone our separate ways, but just out of the blue, Bill called me and said, "Frank, do you know what a Greenway is?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, let's go to Morganton on Saturday morning and look at theirs." So we went down there, and it was really, I can see it very clearly in my mind. It was a brisk Saturday morning, and it was about 9:30 to 10 o'clock, and you had people out there walking their dogs and kids on bicycles, and we walked along probably a few hundred yards, and I said, "Bill, there's no excuse we don't have anything like this in McDowell County." And he said, "Well, Frank, the problem is we want to build it behind Walmart, but no one knows the Phillips family well enough to ask them to donate the land to us." And I said, "Well, I'm good friends with them. I've appraised every piece of real estate that they own." So it wasn't more than just a week or so after that, and Bill gave me a disc about greenways, and Byron Phillips and I were out looking at a piece of property, and I said, "Byron, do you know what a greenway is?" And he said, "No." And I said, "It's a non-motorized walking and biking trail, and we want to build it along the river, and we want you to donate the land to us." And I said, "And we're going to dedicate the Greenway to your father." And he said, "Huh." I said, "I think Sam would like that." So I gave him the disc, and he looked at it, and that's how it all started. It's so interesting that when I know I reflect back on it, and Bill reflects back on it, and so many of our board members that were part of the initial group, where we had to develop master plan, we had to get the city on board with us, we had certainly we had to get the Phillips family on board with us, and the obstacles that we encountered. I always say an obstacle is nothing more than an opportunity to excel, and we had so many opportunities to excel. But as it came to fruition with phase one, and just to know that I could have been a variable in making that come to pass was great. But then as phase two came on, and then as the Greenway here at the Y came on, just to reflect back on what I've been able to, let me just say, my work with the trails and with the greenways will always be my apex. I think it's, and then what we have on the planning board for phase three will give us another 4 miles on the river. And but a lot of people don't understand what all it takes in order to make these kind of things happen. And then a lot of it has to do with just proving that you can accomplish the objective. I know that we had Senator Queen had called and said, "Frank, I want to come down and go out on the Greenway." And I said, "Well, Joe Sam, I can't do it at that time." I said, "But I'll make arrangements and you and Bill can go out and look at it," which he did. And at that time, we had put in for a $360,000 grant for a 1.7 mile greenway here at the Y. and it had been kicked down 2 years in a row to where it was now down to $200,000, and we still hadn't been approved. And so Senator Queen was so impressed. He said, I know where there's some money in Raleigh, and I'm going to go back and get it for you. And it was no more than just a very short while, maybe 2 weeks. He called, and he said, Frank, I got your money. And then, so we had to match up $360,000, of which the Corporating Foundation put up 180 and the county put up 180. And so that's how we got the 1.7 miles here at the Y. But we would have never had that had we not had the Greenway out at the river.
How does it feel when you walk on that Greenway?
Good. I tell you what, I remember it was a Sunday afternoon, and I was out there, and I was by myself. But it was a pretty spring-like day, and I watched 3 generations in one family coming along the Greenway, and the kids laughing, and the grandparents and the parents, and I thought, yeah, mission accomplished. You know, as you get to the backside of life, and you look back of those things that are really important to you, and it all comes back down to your values, not only in regards to your family, but also in regards to your religion, also in regards to how you want to be remembered when you go downrange. And I think that, and that's why I say the things just like with the Greenway, it will always be my apex, is because that and for those that serve on our board and have been so important to making these kind of things happen, and certainly working with the city and with Heather Cotton and with the county, and you know, just to be a part of that and know that we left something that will be good and positive for McDowell County for many generations. My favorite quotation of all times is from Winston Churchill, and his quote is, "You make a living by what you get. You make a life by what you give." So from a professional standpoint, what that does for me, it allows me to to make a living to provide for my family. I do what I do because I enjoy doing it, but being a real estate appraiser is not the highlight of my life. It has allowed me to do these other things that give me a life.
Another question I'd just like to ask, if you had any advice for a young person today, what would it be?
When I speak to young people, I tell them I can guarantee you a good life if you'll do 3 things. If you maintain yourself mentally, physically, and spiritually in proper balance, life will treat you well. One of the greatest problems we have in the United States right now is childhood obesity. So much so that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff came out and said it is a true threat to our national security, because those that volunteer to want to go into the military today, a third of them can't even pass a basic physical fitness test. And it bothers me that we have gotten away from the basic fundamentals of what it takes in order to be great. And I might be 72, but I think I'm 50, an effective age, because I have practiced a life of maintaining myself. So that would be one of the areas that I would ask the young people to focus on. It's not just about your brain, it's about your mental, and it's about your physical and your spiritual.
How is the world today different from when you were growing up?
It's a lot more complex. When I grew up, life was so simple. You didn't have all of these ancillary things pulling at your time. We're supposed to be in a society today where we have instant communications with one another, but yet we don't communicate. We've always in our family, we have focused very much on family. And to me, it's the single most important thing in my life. With my children and my grandchildren and my relationship with my wife, and I can sit before you today and say I'm one of the richest people in the world. But now, what a lot of people don't understand is there is a difference between wealth and riches. Wealth is your portfolio. Well, I'm not a wealthy man, but I'm a very rich man because of my relationships, not only with my family, but all around the world, of people that I've been able to meet that have broadened my life tremendously.
Frank Dean, thank you for letting me interview you today.
My pleasure.